I've owned almost 60 cars in my life and nearly every purchase was a mistake. Today, let's talk about it. So I was going back through my old videos and I realized that I'm not very good at keeping you up to date with the cars that come and go from my collection of misfit vehicles. I've bought and sold a ton of cars and I figured I'd give you a little update on everything I've sold in the last few years, since not all of them get a farewell video before they leave my fleet. But as I started compiling this list, I realized that many of these car purchases were, how should we say it, completely stupid. I mean, buying weird old cars was pretty much the original purpose of my entire channel, but nobody should be buying and selling this many cars. It's not exactly a healthy endeavor, even if it is just for YouTube. There were quite a few times recently where I wasted a ton of money fixing a car, or a vehicle sold for way less than I paid for it, or I ended up completely regretting selling a car. So today, let's talk about it, and I think we should start with my most recent sale, my 1991 Toyota Land Cruiser. The FJ80. Now, these are very seriously capable machines when they're not completely falling apart. And as it turns out, mine was completely falling apart. Now, I bought this vehicle sight unseen at an online auction. I paid about $4,500 for it, if I remember correctly. And I don't think I remember correctly because a lot of times when I buy vehicles, I tend to sort of block out the price part of it because I think at the time I kind of know it's a bad idea, so I just don't even want to remember it. So the body of the vehicle was in pretty good shape, and I had my friend Serge come over and he helped me fix a few things. Pretty quickly, we learned that the vehicle had way more problems than I thought it would. You know, you figure it's a Toyota, it can't be that bad, right? It was that bad. It had a lot of issues. Now, it was a theft recovery vehicle, so I thought I was going to spend most of my time just fixing up the dashboard that got completely torn apart. But no, there were a whole host of issues. It wouldn't even come close to passing smog. I think the head gasket might have started to go. There were issues with the suspension, but I think the biggest problem is that the vehicle was a salvage title vehicle, which is worth a whole lot less than a clean title Land Cruiser. You know, I was thinking, oh, maybe I would fix a bunch of stuff, drive it around for 6 months, and then sell it for a tidy profit, and that definitely did not happen. So I think the main issue with the Land Cruiser is that I just found myself not really enjoying working on it that much, and it just took me owning that vehicle to realize that I didn't really have a passion for it, and unfortunately that was a somewhat expensive mistake. And I guess just from sort of like a business perspective, I thought that the Toyota Land Cruiser videos would do a lot better than they did. I figured, okay, well, if I'm gonna lose money on the car, at least I can make a little ad revenue with these Land Cruiser videos, but turns out you guys didn't watch them. Nobody watched them. So I kind of gave up on it for that reason too, just because I knew I wasn't gonna make any YouTube money for this car. And I had a bunch of people come and say they were interested and nobody wanted to buy it. So I was like, all right, this is going to the lowest bidder. So yes, I sold it to a guy and he literally prayed when he took it. So I'm thinking like he knew there was an issue with this car too. He was like literally praying. I'm like, okay, good luck. But the good news is that he was a tow truck driver, so he literally showed up with a tow truck, loaded it up, hauled it away, which I was very happy about. So yeah, don't do any of this. All of this was a terrible idea. Don't buy a vehicle sight unseen. Don't buy a vehicle that you don't really know if you're passionate about. So yeah, I guess that's the moral of that story. All right, 1987 Volkswagen Fox Wagon. Now, this vehicle is super rare. I've only ever seen maybe one other in my entire life. So when I saw this one come up for sale not too far away from where I live, I knew I had to go take a look at it. So the car ran and drove, but not very well. I made it all the way home, but I had to have somebody tail me because I wasn't sure if it was going to make it. The brakes barely worked, but I was able to get it home without any issues. So I got it home and I realized, okay, well, I've got about 7 or 8 other project cars. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea to take on another one. So unfortunately, the Fox sat and sat and sat and sat. And I think every time I went out to start working on it, I was just overwhelmed because once again, there were just so many things wrong with it that I didn't realize when I looked at the car. And after sitting for a few months, it developed a few other problems it didn't have when I first bought it. It started stalling, it was leaking a ton, like the whole back of the car got filled with water when it rained, several electrical shorts that I could not figure out. The exhaust fell off somehow just randomly on its own. The master cylinder finally failed. The brake pedal started going all the way to the floor. And to top things off, it started leaking gasoline. Now, I did what I could to try to alleviate those gas leaks, but I fixed it in one spot and then all of a sudden it would spring a leak in another spot. So pretty much all of the gas lines needed to be replaced. And honestly, the car was just in really terrible shape. The interior was trashed. The exterior was not so great. There was a little bit of rust. All in all, I was just enamored by the rarity of this car, and I think that's what got me to purchase it. But in the end, it just had so many issues that I just couldn't see myself spending all of that time and all of that money fixing it. So I gave this problem to somebody else. I sold the vehicle to this guy who seemed like he was gonna fix it. I hope he's gonna fix it because it's kind of a cool old wagon. So I think I stupidly paid like $3,000 for this heap of Volkswagen trash, and I sold it for $1,500. So yeah, another money losing situation. At least I got to look at it for a while. I guess that's the nice thing about owning an old Fox wagon that doesn't really run properly, is that every time I went outside, I was like, oh yeah, I like looking at that car. I should have just made it a lawn ornament, but hopefully it's on the road now. Who knows? Yes, another bad idea. Let's move on to the next bad idea. All right, my 1997 Cadillac DeVille d'Elegance. Yes, this had the North Star engine. The North Star engine that always tends to have head gasket problems. Those head bolts just completely disintegrate. And this is a problem that a lot of North Star engines had. And yes, mine had the exact same issue. So this was another vehicle that I bought sight unseen at auction. And I bought it kind of not really remembering that it had the North Star engine. If I had remembered that it came with the North Star, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But I got it home and realized, oh yeah, I immediately knew I made a terrible mistake. Yes, it would run, it wouldn't run very well, and it would just be a whole plume of white smoke coming out of the tailpipes because of all of that coolant getting burned. But once again, it was the nostalgia that triggered all of this. I was enamored by those beautiful, luxurious burgundy seats and burgundy interior. Kind of took me back to like what my grandparents used to drive. And I thought, okay, I think there's a way I can fix this. I know I can spend a couple $1,000s and get this engine fixed, right? Now, it turns out it's a lot more than a couple $1,000s to fix a North Star unless you're doing it yourself, which I definitely can't do it. It's way beyond my pay grade. But I did find a guy that specializes in fixing North Star engines in Southern California, and he charges $4,500 minimum to do it. And I could not find anyone else that wanted to come close to touching this North Star engine. He was pretty much the only one that would do it. And unfortunately, when you spend, a couple grand on a car at auction, and then you're gonna spend, $4,500 fixing it, the car itself is probably only worth like 4 or 5 grand. So it just did not make financial sense. So yes, this car went back to auction. Yes, I sent it back to the auction, and hopefully it's somebody else's problem right now. So yes, another money losing situation. Will I ever learn? No, I will not. Okay, let's talk about a vehicle ownership experience that wasn't completely terrible. Wouldn't that be nice for a change? And that was my 2005 Nissan Altima. Yes, my Altima ownership experience was relatively decent. Now, you might be familiar with the term big Altima energy, and if you're not, watch my video about that right now because that will inform you about a few things when it comes to Altimas. But mine was a 5-speed manual transmission Altima. It wasn't one of those newer ones with the continuously variable transmission that always seem to explode. So this was pretty reliable. The previous owner had done a ton of maintenance. It was in pretty decent shape aside from the paint, and I don't really know why I bought it other than it was just kind of a weird thing, like an Altima with a manual transmission, just not very common. I just really like the idea of a generic beige car with a manual transmission. It was sort of anonymous, but kind of fun in a way. And that generation Altima was very spacious on the inside. It was pretty comfortable. It was not quick, it had the 4-cylinder, but I do really like owning vehicles where I don't care if they get dinged, I don't care if they get crashed into. This was just a 2005 Altima, no big deal. And I'd never owned an Altima before, so I figured, why don't I have a little big Altima energy for a bit? Now, I paid $1,800 for it, and I sold it for $2,700, which was great because all I did in terms of maintenance was I put a new shift knob on it. That's it. So I actually made some money with my 2005 Nissan Altima. Now, I do think that my 2005 Nissan Altima will continue to have big Altima energy in the future. The woman that bought it didn't really know how to drive manual transmission. It was a little bit nerve-wracking during the test drive. So who knows, that old Nissan Altima may have more dings and dents than it did when I had it, which is perfectly in line with an Altima. All right, let's talk about my 2011 Nissan Leaf. Yes, that radioactive yellow electric vehicle with tri-spoke wheels and only about 30-40 miles of range left on the battery. Now, my friend Brad owed me a little bit of money and he said, hey, instead of me giving you that money, why don't you take that old Nissan Leaf off my hands and we'll call it even. And I said, you know what, I kind of want an electric car. I've never owned an electric car before. So I got the thing home and started driving it around. And as it turns out, having only 30 to 40 miles of range is totally fine for the type of driving that I was doing. Take take my kid to school, I could go shopping. The average American drives less than like 35 miles a day, and most trips are under 5 miles, so a car with this little range can work out for a lot of people, and it did work out for a lot of situations that I had. And I wasn't planning on keeping the Leaf for very long. I just wanted to experience having an electric car and see what it was all about, and I really liked it, so I started making a whole bunch more videos about electric cars. So I fixed a few small things in the vehicle, didn't spend a ton of money on it, and ended up selling it for $3,500 to a friend of a friend, which was great. Don't really know if I made or lost money on this because it was a little ambiguous because it was sort of a trade, but in the end, I was pretty happy with that ownership experience. Glad to be able to say those words for once. Now, this was like the nicest vehicle I've ever owned in my life. And yes, that's kind of weird to say that a Civic is the nicest vehicle that anybody's ever owned, but this was super nice. It was incredibly fast. It was one of the best handling cars I've ever driven. Yes, the looks are completely polarizing. I used to completely hate the look of this generation Civic Type R, but I realized that all those creases and crazy shapes and design shenanigans really had a purpose. Yeah, it looked completely crazy, but the capabilities of the car could back all of that up. I mean, I did sort of feel pretty stupid driving it around sometimes because it just was so wild, but you just sort of forget all about that when you're driving it because it is so much fun. But ultimately, I decided to sell it because I just didn't drive it that much, and it's not because the car was bad, it's just my life situation at the time just didn't require a whole lot of driving. So I had this sort of expensive car that was just kind of sitting a lot of the time, and every time I saw it in the garage, it just sort of looked like a pile of money sitting there that I didn't have access to. So decided to sell it. I sold it for a couple $1,000s less than I paid for it, which seems fine considering I owned it for a year. I feel like $2,000 to own a Civic Type R for a year was a pretty good price to pay. But now, you know, a year later, I totally regret it because I'm driving more and I just miss having like a new reliable car. That car was so reliable. It was a Honda, but it was also insanely fun. And I really did kind of grow to like how it looked. So yeah, that's probably the one that I regret selling the most out of this whole list that we're going to talk about today. I'm kind of sad about selling that one. All right, my 1990 Pontiac Grand Am SE. Now, this vehicle was in pretty good shape, and I think the thing that was most surprising about it was that it just existed. Pontiac Grand Ams just don't exist anymore from that generation. Most of them are gone. They've been sent to the junkyard years ago. So when I found this one for sale, I just had to buy it, especially because it had those super rad wheels, like one of the coolest wheels from the 90s. Pontiac just made great wheels. But I think there was a reason why a lot of these Grand Ams don't exist anymore. They were built to a price point not exactly known for high quality, especially with the quad 4 engine, which were known to eat head gaskets. So it was sort of surprising that this one still existed. Maybe the head gasket had been done at some point. But you know, just kind of typical GM quality from the 90s, super creaky, plasticky interior. Now, I put a ton of money into this car. I think I spent about $2,000 fixing this thing up. It had a lot of issues. And by the time I was done with it, this was probably the best running, best maintained Grand Am on the planet. I really made sure that this car was in as tip-top shape as I could possibly make it. And you know, this was definitely not going to be a long-term vehicle for me. My whole point was just to own it for a little bit and make a couple videos with it and sell it to somebody that just absolutely loved Grand Ams. So I figured, why don't I list this on Bring a Trailer? You know, that auction site that generally has super high dollar Porsches and Lamborghinis and that kind of thing. Why don't I sell my Pontiac Grand Am on that site? And they accepted it, which I was kind of surprised about. But I think they realized it was a pretty unique thing to have a Grand Am like this. So I think it sold for $3,200, something like that. The winning bidder actually called me up and said he bought it as a joke, which I thought was kind of lame. He bought it as a joke for his kid. I don't know. I'm just like, okay, well, if that's what you want to do with your money, go right ahead. So his kid showed up the next day, handed me a wad of cash and took off. And yeah, I was like, okay, that was a weird experience. And then the crazy thing is, like a week later, this guy who said he bought the vehicle as a joke, he said, hey, I'm going to take you to small claims court because this car isn't as it was described. I'm like, okay, you're crazy. You didn't read the description. I told you everything that was wrong with it. He said, what did he say? He said something like, okay, one of the speakers isn't working in the radio and like a taillight bulb was out. He's going to take me to small claims court over this. And I'm like, no, dude, this is not how vehicle purchases work. You didn't inspect the car and you didn't read the description and you drove away with the car. So I'm like, all right, you can take me to small claims court if you want, but it's not going to go well for you. Anyway, you know, months later, he never did it. I think it was just a scare tactic, but I'm not easily scared because car stuff doesn't scare me anymore. All right, my 1986 Porsche 944 Turbo. Now, I owned this vehicle for quite a long time. Me and my friend Brad co-purchased the car together. We spent $7,000 on this 944 Turbo, so I only put $3,500 into it, which is a pretty incredible price for a 944 Turbo. These are insanely capable machines. Now, Brad had the car for a while, and it turns out he didn't really drive it, like, ever. So he said, hey, why don't you come up and get it, and I can have my turn with the vehicle. So I made a ton of videos with this vehicle, chronicling the ups and downs with this machine, from it spewing coolant to having a hole in the brake rotor to leaving me stranded on the side of a mountain. But in general, I can kind of forgive all of those things because this was one of the coolest cars I've ever owned. I just loved looking at the thing. I loved driving it. It was so much fun. I love the pop-up headlights. I love that 80s nostalgia. I love the cocaine white paint with that brown interior. There was so many things to like about this car. It was so much fun on a winding road. I think the main problem with this vehicle is that it had over 300,000 miles on it. Yes, a 944 Turbo with that many miles. Yeah, it's not exactly going to be reliable. I can't even recount all of the things that I fixed. It's just almost everything was fixed. Like, we literally replaced every bit of the car. And then I never made a video about this because it made me so sad, but I calculated the cost per mile for my 944 Turbo. I'm just gonna leave a little pause here so you can think about, okay, how much do you think it cost me per mile to run my 944 Turbo? I'll let you take a guess. And you're never gonna get it because it's way higher than you think. It cost me $5 per mile to drive this vehicle. Yes, it was not a cheap vehicle to run. And okay, I'll admit, maybe I could have driven it more to get a little bit more value out of that money. But you know, when it has issues here and there, you kind of don't drive it that much because you're fixing it. So I think it was probably at the point where I got most of the major issues sorted out, and I could have brought that $5 down to like $4.50 or $4.25. But I think at that point, I'm like, okay, I've enjoyed this car. I've had a great experience with, driving this car. The next owner is gonna get a 944 Turbo that is just completely all fixed up. And I sold it on Bring a Trailer for maybe 13 grand, something like that. And we broke even. So yeah, we put about $6,500 into the car or something like that. So it turns out I got to own a 944 Turbo for about 3 to 4 years, and it cost me nothing. So yeah, I guess that was a pretty good experience. Okay, so my 1992 Ford F-150 Flareside. Now, this is a vehicle that you don't really see very often. You can see some old F-150s from this generation with the standard sides, but it's not often that you see one with the Flareside bed. Now, I'm not really a truck person. I've owned a bunch of trucks in my life, but never really loved the ownership experience. It's just mainly just so I can have something so I can haul some crap around. And the Flareside's not very good at hauling because the bed is so small, but I just really liked how this one looked. I was just searching on Craigslist one day and I came across it and I realized, oh, I know where that is. That's my neighbor's truck. So I went over, talked to him for a little bit, and I ended up buying the thing. And yeah, I needed a little bit of work here and there, but I didn't put a ton of money into it. Previous owner had it painted. They did the whole interior. It looked really nice for the age of the vehicle. So I figured I'd make a couple videos with it and sell it, and that's exactly what I did. Put it on Bring a Trailer, and I made about 4 grand with this vehicle. I like to document this. I'm gonna watch this later because generally most of my selling experiences go so poorly, but this one actually went pretty well. I wasn't intending on trying to flip the car. I just wanted to own it for a little bit, but it turns out, yeah, this was a vehicle that, the seller was kind of undervaluing it, and I made a little bit of profit. So yay me. All right, my 1999 Acura Integra LS. Now, this was a super clean Integra, had under 100,000 miles. Now, this was a vehicle that I bought sight unseen from auction, and this was one that didn't go as poorly as the other vehicles that I bought sight unseen. Super clean, the body was perfect, the interior looked like new. I figured I can't go that wrong with it. I think I paid 3 grand for it, but again, I don't remember because I block all of this stuff out. And I got it home, and sure enough, there was something wrong with the engine. Probably what happened is the car had some really bad gas in it. It caused it to detonate and jump timing and basically bent a bunch of valves in the engine. Yeah, so the engine needed a whole bunch of work, needed a new head, but I found a Honda shop that is super highly respected in Los Angeles, and I had them do the work, and they did a great job. So this was a non-VTEC Integra, and a lot of people ask me, you were putting all this money into this car, why didn't you just put a VTEC motor in this Integra? And I thought, well, okay, this is a low mile vehicle. I wanted to keep it as original as possible for someone that just loved the originality of it. When it comes to Integras, so many of them are cut up or modified or trashed. So I wanted to make it as stock as possible. So that's why I didn't do anything crazy. And it turns out that's valued by some buyers. So I listed it on Bring a Trailer. And here's another vehicle where I didn't lose my shirt. I made a few bucks on it, didn't make a ton of money. Yeah, that was a vehicle that I enjoyed owning. The ownership experience was really good. It was a lot of fun on a canyon road. Yeah, for some reason that one kind of worked out. So not all of my sight unseen purchases are terrible. Yeah, that one was okay. Okay, my Lexus GS300. Now I bought this vehicle also sight unseen at auction, and it was in pretty good physical shape. The exterior was in really good condition. The interior was in really good shape, but it had some mechanical issues. And I knew that when I bought it, but I just really loved the shape of this vehicle. I really loved how it looked, and they're kind of rare in the US. At least this generation is. But ultimately, this is just another one of those situations where it was gonna cost me way more to fix it than the car was worth. Again, I sort of, after owning the car for a while, I just sort of lost interest. You know, that happens with projects. I just kind of didn't really have the passion for this particular car. And you know, it was a stupid purchase. I made a mistake, and I will definitely admit that. I'll always admit when I make a mistake. And there's a lot of mistake making on this channel over the years. So I ended up selling it to a friend of a friend who was a mechanic, and they got it running pretty quickly, and they got it running pretty well. So I was glad to see that this GS300 didn't end up in the junkyard, and hopefully it's still running and driving today. So here's kind of a boring one. I bought that black Ram 1500 sight unseen at online auction. I don't even remember how much I paid for it, but I bought it because I was thinking, oh, I kind of want a truck to have around, and I'll rent it out on Turo to make a few bucks when I'm not using it. And after spending a bunch of time researching Turo, I realized that, yeah, this is not gonna be worth my time. If you have a huge fleet of cars and you really dedicate a lot of time and effort to making Turo work for you to rent your cars out on Turo, it can make a lot of sense, but I feel like I could have gotten like $29 a day to rent out this Ram. I was thinking about that. I'm like, that's a lot of effort for ownership of a vehicle like this. I mean, even when I think about, like, my sister and her husband have a bike rental shop in Australia, and they get way more than $29 a day to rent a bike. So I'm like, why am I only getting $29 a day to rent out a whole pickup truck? So it just seemed pretty silly. Like, if I wanted to make money renting things out, it certainly wouldn't be cars. Maybe I'll start a bike rental shop here. So anyway, I sold the vehicle a few months later for about what I paid for it. So yeah, not really that interesting, but I won't buy vehicles again that I'm not really that passionate about. Famous last words, right? I'll probably end up doing that again. Okay, my 1998 Subaru Legacy, that beautiful green sedan that was given to me by a friend. They had it in their family since I think it was new. It was in pretty good shape. They took really good care of it. They always joke when they were gonna get rid of that car, they would give it to me, and sure enough, they did. So yeah, it was actually a free car. I fixed up a bunch of things, put some new tires on it, got it tuned up, got it to pass smog. But it was a high mileage Subaru, so there were a few issues here and there. Ultimately, I didn't really make that many videos with it because, once again, it wasn't a type of video that many people watch, so it didn't seem like it was worth spending a bunch of time making videos on this car that nobody really cared about. So I was super thankful that I got this car for free. I drove it around a whole lot, and I ended up giving it to my brother-in-law, who drove it for like 2 years. It was his main form of transportation. Yeah, it was starting to burn coolant. It was starting to have some issues, but it worked as basic transportation for him for a long time. So I was glad that this car went on to live a little bit longer after I had my time with it. So got it for free, paid it forward. All right, my green 2001 Toyota Tacoma four-wheel drive. Now this was my dad's truck. It spent many, many winters in Massachusetts, so it had a fair amount of rust. When my parents moved out to California, they brought the truck with them and then realized they didn't really need it, so they gave it to me. And you know, having a bunch of vehicles, it didn't really get driven all that much. I used it for truck things when I needed to do truck things. And I made a couple videos with this truck, and the most recent video that I made with it was when I recovered it after it was stolen. Yes, the truck got stolen when I was trying to sell it. You know, first I tried to list it on eBay and the winning bidder never paid me. And then I brought it to CarMax and they kind of gave me a sort of a lowball offer. And then I figured, okay, I'll just list it on Craigslist, and I tried to sell it. So I had somebody come out to take a look at the thing. They were sitting in the car listening to the thing idle. I was actually outside of the truck talking to them with the door open, and he literally just drove off with the thing. Yep, he just stole it right in front of me. And yeah, that was an interesting experience. Didn't really like that very much. But luckily they found the vehicle a few days later. It was in good condition. It wasn't crashed. There was nothing wrong with it other than the fact that I no longer had the key to it. But turns out my dad had a spare key, so we were able to get the car. So yeah, I got it back home, and then I immediately changed how I do things when it comes to selling vehicles. Now, anytime I sell a vehicle, I meet at a police station. I take a picture of the person that is looking at the vehicle. I take a picture of their license. Hopefully that's enough to try to deter people from stealing the car from me. In retrospect, I would have done some things differently, but I'm just glad that there were no weapons involved, anything like that, and he just took the car away from me. So anyway, I ended up selling it to a guy for just like $7,000 or $8,000, which you think is kind of a lot of money for a 2001 Tacoma that's kind of rusty, but those vehicles have kind of insane valuations right now. I kind of get it because they're amazing trucks and they run a long time and they're really, really good vehicles. So yeah, it's kind of nuts, but you know, I made a little bit of money on that vehicle after a whole bunch of garbage to deal with. Ultimately, was it worth all the stress? I don't know. There's sort of weighing the experience of owning a vehicle. Yeah, a lot of times that's really great. Sometimes it's not great. And then there's the whole like, okay, well, there's a lot of stress that comes with owning vehicles, especially when they're not running properly or when they have issues, which all vehicles have issues at some point. So there's that whole like balance of like weighing like the experience versus the garbage you have to deal with. And I feel like, yeah, the garbage one is kind of pushing down a little bit more in pretty much all of my scenarios. So there's a few beacons of light in all of this madness, but yeah, in general, I don't make very good decisions. So don't do what I do. Okay, so I guess that's just about it for the cars that I've sold in the last few years. And as it turns out, not every single vehicle was a mistake, but quite a few of them were not exactly great ideas. Thanks so much for watching. If you like videos like this where you can live vicariously through my stupidity, please hit that subscribe button or that bell icon so you can get notified of all my new car reviews, used car reviews, and videos about stuff I shouldn't buy. If you'd like to help support all this madness, please consider buying a Hello Road t-shirt at helloroad.tv/shop. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.